Okay, Matthew 22, please, as we continue on the parables. Hey, Dave. Hey, Bill, what's up? Matthew 22, verse 1. And Jesus, Matthew 22, verse 1.
22, Matthew.
Yeah, Matthew 22, verses 1 to 14.
Alrighty.
And Jesus answered and spake unto them again by parables, and said, The kingdom of heaven is like unto a certain king, which made a marriage for his son, and sent forth his servants to call them that were bidden to the wedding, and they would not come. Again he sent forth other servants, saying, Tell them which are bidden, Behold, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and my fatlings are killed, and all things are ready. Come unto the marriage. But they made light of it, and went their ways, one to his farm, another to his merchandise. Notice that a whole bunch of people were called. Not everyone accepted the invitation. That's like it is with the gospel. And the remnant took his servants and entreated them spitefully and slew them. There was a lady, a pastor's wife, who held a birthday party for her son turning 15. The invitation went out to a lot of people. Hardly anybody showed up. You can reject the invitation. But when the king heard thereof, he was wroth, and he sent forth his armies, and destroyed those murderers, and burned up their city. Then saith he to his servants, The wedding is ready, but they which were bidden were not worthy. Go ye therefore into the highways, and as many as ye shall find, bid to the marriage. So those servants went out into the highways, and gathered together all, as many as they found, both good and bad and good. Doesn't say ugly. And the wedding was furnished with guests. And when the king came in to see the guests, he saw there a man which had not on a wedding garment. And he saith unto him, Friend, how camest thou in hither not having a wedding garment? And he was speechless. He didn't know what to say. Then the king said to the servants, Bind him hand and foot, and take him away, and cast him into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. No annihilation. For many are called, but few are chosen. This man, not having the wedding garments, represents people in the church that aren't saved. I mean, people can sit in your church service and are not Christians. And they can talk the talk. They can be just like everyone else externally, but inside they are not saved. They don't have Christ's righteousness. They're still dressed in their own filthy rags of self-righteousness and sin. Compare this to the marriage supper of the Lamb, Revelation 19:8-9. You don't have to turn there, I can read it. And to her was granted that she should be arrayed in fine linen, clean and white. For the fine linen is the righteousness of saints. And he saith unto me, Right, blessed are they which are called unto the marriage supper of the Lamb. And he saith unto me, These are the true sayings of God. Now, a little detail when you read a translation is that you see it in black and white, or of course it's red letters in my Bible. You got to see it in living color. Douloi is used for servants until verse 13. Now in my King James it still says servants, but it's a different word in Greek. We're slaves, douloi. Actually modern Greek probably pronounces it douli, but the stuff they teach you in seminaries, and they would call that douloi. That's the servants that you see until verse 13, when the king said to the servants, Bind him hand and foot, and throw him out. That's a different one. That's diakonoi. We get our word deacons from that. That's a higher form of a servant. And those happen to be the angels. So it's not the same servants that sent out the invitation. Another type of a servant is going to throw people out. It's different in Greek, but it's the same in my King James Bible. Any questions so far? Matthew 22:32. Let's try this again. Matthew 24:32. Now learn a parable of the fig tree. So we know this is a parable, even though it's not a long story. When his branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, ye know that summer is nigh. So likewise ye, when ye shall see all these things, know that it is near, even at the doors. He's talking about the end times. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. Then he says, heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. Of course, this is very controversial as to what a generation is. Look at Mark, but it does call it a parable. Let's look at Mark 11, verse 12. Something about the fig trees, talking about the end times. Mark 11:12. And on the morrow, when they were come from Bethany, he was hungry. And seeth the fig tree afar off having leaves, he came, if haply he might find anything thereon. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for the time of figs was not yet. It was not a defective fig tree, because the time of figs was not yet. He just thought maybe there's something that grew up a bit early. And Jesus answered and said unto it, no man eateth the fruit of thee hereafter forever. And his disciples heard it. The fig tree is believed to represent Israel. He came to Israel. Wasn't the fruit. He came into his own, but his own received him not. So he said, okay, you're not going to bear fruit. And he went to the Gentiles. Actually, the gospel went to the Gentiles. The church is made up. My estimation of having been in churches is that in a typical church, you get 400 people in a church, you might have 2 of Jewish ethnicity, like me. It's something like, half a percent, 1% maybe of the church is Jewish. Now that's in the United States where 2% of the population is Jewish. Just counts I've taken in different places. You'd be in a church of 1,000, there might be 5 to 10 Jews. And that's in a place with a high Jewish population. Basically, as far as Israel goes, they rejected him, so he just went somewhere else to find his fruit. But the gospel will go back to them eventually after the second advent. We're going to look at 3 parables. And this is in Matthew 25. The parable of the 10 virgins teaches personal responsibility. Of course, it teaches a lot more than that. The parable of the talents teaches responsibility with what God has given us. And the parable of the sheep and goat teaches responsibility towards God's people. So these are teaching us responsibility. We are responsible for certain things. So it's ourselves, our talents, and God's people. By the way, should it be in that order? There's people that, at least this is why we don't live by t-shirts and bumper stickers. Joy, Jesus, others, you. When you put others before yourself, you can get trampled by other people, by other Christians. It can be very demanding. You become that omega wolf in a church setting. You're the one they ask to do the chores nobody else wants to do. Jesus, others, you is not biblical. Jesus first, but you've got to take care of yourself or you can't take care of others. It doesn't mean you're totally out for yourself, but in ministry, you have got to take care of yourself. I was talking with somebody who's very good at church history. He's some type of Bible school or seminary student now. And we were talking, and he mentioned, because I brought up that there's an older paradigm of missions where you serve God, you take care of God or God's work, and God will take care of your kids. So kids were neglected. People would leave their kids. Maybe a couple would, a couple might leave their kids, their wives. A guy might leave his wife. I'm going to take care of God's work. Fortunately, that paradigm is disappearing. God created the family before the church. Family is your first responsibility. Doesn't mean you ignore the church. Doesn't mean you deny the gospel under torture or some type of persecution. But you've got to watch out about especially putting everyone else in front of you. You're just going to get kicked around. So let's look at the first of these. Matthew 25:1. Then shall the kingdom of heaven be likened unto 10 virgins, which took their lamps and went forth to meet the bridegroom. And 5 of them were wise, and 5 were foolish. Now, we tend to think servants always represent Christians in these parables. And we tend to think that virgins always represent Christians. Well, this will tell you that the virgins don't always represent Christians. This was what you had for a bridal party. And servants, by the way, there are evil servants in those parables. The wicked and slothful servant, whatever. So, because you see servant, don't think that necessarily is a good servant. God's got good servants and God's got bad servants. God can use someone like Nebuchadnezzar to do some awful things. God can use unsaved people as his servants. Doesn't necessarily mean that they are Christians when you read these. And 5 of them were wise and 5 were foolish. They that were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them. Oil represents the Holy Spirit. These are people without the Holy Spirit. They're not Christians. But the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. When the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. I know, back in those days, customs were certainly different than they are now. And at midnight, because here's a wedding starting at midnight, and at midnight there was a cry made, Behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said unto the wise, Give us of your oil, for our lamps are gone out. But the wise answered, saying, Not so. See, they weren't going to go without because foolish people, foolish virgins in this case, didn't do what they were supposed to do. Not so, lest there be not enough for us and you, but go ye rather to them that sell and buy for yourselves. And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and they that were ready went in with him to the marriage. And you see this several times in the Bible. And the door was shut. Think of the angels bringing Lot in the house, shutting the door. Afterward came also the other virgins, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. Now this Lord, yes, it represents Jesus Christ, but it can also mean sir, master, like an animal. An animal's got its master. That's my dog, I'm the master. It's the same word in Greek. So they're not necessarily calling him the Lord, even though it represents the Lord. But he answered and said, Verily I say unto you, I know you not. Watch now, we've seen that elsewhere in the Bible. That means that they're unsaved. Think of Matthew 7. But actually, let's turn to Matthew 7 for just a second. Matthew 7, verse 21. Not everyone that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father which is in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name? And in thy name have cast out devils, and in thy name done many wonderful works. It's what they're claiming. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. And then I will profess unto them, I never knew you. Depart from me, ye that work iniquity. Okay? So that parallels, those two things parallel each other. Watch therefore, for ye know not neither the day nor the hour when the Son of Man cometh, unless you want to make a whole lot of money selling books to gullible Christians when you're predicting at least the day of the rapture or the second advent. I have survived so many raptures, I have lost count. I actually counted them once to put in a book, my first book I wrote. And there's been more since then. So Jesus is saying, you don't know the day or the hour, but actually there are some authors that are more brilliant than Jesus is because they do know the day and the hour. Except for some reason their predictions never come to pass. At least their date setting. Anyway, yeah, you don't know when the second advent's going to be, or the rapture. So, at the very least, you could see that there were responsible and irresponsible virgins involved. The ones that didn't have oil were cast out. They were not allowed in. They were not saved, even though they were with the others. And the others didn't go without so that they could have. I'm not saying you shouldn't give things to people. But be careful in ministry that you don't get so depleted taking care of irresponsible church members that you don't have enough for yourself. Burnout is a big problem in the pastorate. The average pastorate lasts probably 4 years. Now, what I like is some of these independent Baptist churches, probably Southern Baptist too. I mean, one Central Baptist preacher I know, they'll go in the mission field and over 40 years later, they're retiring from the same place. That's good. There is a lot of burnout where pastors don't last. But I like it when someone's there for 40 years or more because it shows they didn't burn out. Matthew 25:14. This also starts, though we won't go there, in Luke 19:11. For the kingdom of heaven is as a man traveling into a far country, who called his own servants and delivered unto them his goods. And unto one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to every man according to his several ability. See, we have different abilities. And straightway took his journey. Then he that had received the 5 talents went and traded with the same, and made them other 5 talents. And likewise he that had received 2, he also gained other 2. But he that had received 1 went and digged in the earth, and hid his Lord's money. After a long time the Lord of those servants cometh and reckoned with them. Yeah, Jesus Christ will come back, but it's going to be after a long time. It's already been 2,000 years. And so he that had received 5 talents came and brought other 5 talents, saying, Lord, thou deliveredst unto me 5 talents. Behold, I have gained beside them 5 talents more. His Lord said unto him, Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. He also that had received 2 talents came and said, Lord, thou deliveredst unto me 2 talents. Behold, I have gained 2 other talents beside them. His Lord said unto him, Well done, good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of the Lord. He wasn't rebuked because he didn't have 5 talents. He was only given 2 and he got 2 more. But he was faithful with that which God gave him. Then he which had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew that thou art an hard man, reaping there where thou hast not sown, and gathering where thou hast not strawed. And I was afraid, and went and hid thy talent in the earth, and lo, there thou hast that is thine. His Lord answered and said unto him, Thou wicked and slothful servant, thou knewest that I reap where I sowed not, and gather where I have not strawed. Thou oughtest therefore to have put my money to the exchangers, and then at my coming I should have received mine own with usury. It's interesting, because the Old Testament forbids usury to a brother. Okay? Usury is an interesting thing, because let's face it, our economy these days works a lot through borrowing and lending. And a lot of the times in medieval days, Christians wouldn't lend to other Christians, so they'd borrow from the Jews. And the Jews got rich, a lot of them, lending to Christians. And then when they got too rich, the Christians would take their money, kick them out of the country, and then maybe invite them back later on to get the economy going again, because the Jews were so literate and enumerate that they could do that. When you've got a lot of illiterate people, and the Jews are rarely illiterate, then people who can read and write and count and keep, accounts and everything, they're very valuable for building up your economy again. But here, it's not a matter of lending to a brother, it's just investing, really. Take therefore the talent from him and give it unto him which hath 10 talents. For unto every one that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. From him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. And cast ye the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. This is hell. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Okay? So, a servant isn't necessarily a Christian. The wicked and slothful servant. It's not someone who lost his salvation. It was actually, in some cases, we can just simply not use what God has given us to multiply something or other in the kingdom of God. I mean, it could be the ability to sing in a worship service. It could be the ability to write, to preach to people on the street, to preach in the pulpit, to give money to a church or something like that. But really the ultimate is when the person isn't even saved and they're just scared. Remember in Revelation, the fearful and the unbelieving. The fearful people go to hell. That's what the Bible tells you. Doesn't mean if you're scared because, 3 gangsters are coming after you. Maybe should be a little bit scared. But real fear keeps people from the gospel. By the way, a talent is equal to 6,000 denarii. I'm sure you all know what that means. Since 1 denarius is a common laborer's daily wage, a talent would be roughly equivalent to 20 years' wages for the average worker. 5 talents, the largest amount entrusted to any of the servants, is comparable to 100 years' worth of labor. That's a lot of money. God actually gives us a lot. Maybe not always a lot of money, but he's given us some real riches. What do we do with them? Do we use them? Do we invest them to try to multiply them? Or do we just say, I'm not going to do anything? I mean, this is scary. I have to go and preach to somebody. He might reject the gospel. And then I'm going to feel insulted and belittled when he makes fun of me. Matthew 25:31. When the Son of Man shall come in his glory and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory. And before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divideth his sheep from the goats. Now, sheep are the good guys in the Bible, goats are the bad guys, which is interesting because sheep are stupid. Goats they can be pets like dogs. They'll follow you when you jog. But there was Ray Vanderlaan, who takes groups over to Israel and shows them, this is where things happen, and it gives us a better view of what's going on in the Bible. I saw a DVD in a church Sunday school class where he had, on one of his presentations, there was a guy who was obviously an American Indian by his dress, his hat, his look, and his accent. And the American Indian, and he was talking about that, and the Indian mentioned why he said they keep as few goats as possible. Now, I didn't quite catch it. When they're talking about something you've never heard before, you're trying to get it all, and I wish I could see that again. But there's a reason. He said, blah, 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 something or other, and that's why we keep as few goats as possible. If I can ever get my hand on that DVD again, it would be interesting. Goats are more intelligent, and goats are used to even trick sheep into going to the slaughter. Think of that. So they call the Judas goat. Verse 33, and he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, so those are the sheep, Come ye, blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was an hungered, and you gave me meat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. Naked, and you clothed me. And that doesn't necessarily mean stark naked with nothing, maybe just not clothed well enough. I was sick, and you visited me. He didn't say I was sick, and you healed me miraculously, although I do believe that happens. I was in prison, and you came unto me. In other words, he didn't say I was in prison and you broke me out. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee an hungered, and fed thee, or thirsty, and gave thee drink? When saw we thee a stranger, and took thee in, or naked, and clothed thee? So this is 6 things. So when saw we thee sick, or in prison, and came unto thee? And the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. Now, it's 4th or 5th grade social studies class. We learn man has 3 basic needs: food, clothing, and shelter. I went home and told my father. Very much a self-made man who grew up very poor, depression and all that. World War II rationing, food, including food rationing. 2 in a bed, no toys. He used Jell-O jars for trucks. Poverty, which I saw later in my own life. And, but he grew up in that kind of poverty, and he did not miss a beat. He said there's a 4th one, a job. When he was 12 years old, he got a job. He said he was 16. I mean, that's what you had to do to survive back in those days. And he's always worked. I've never known him to be unemployed. So, but here we see basically food, water, clothing, shelter, health, and freedom. Although the people who didn't have health you visited, the people who didn't have freedom you visited. So, here's one I learned in a health class in Bible school. Air is the first thing you need. You cut off someone's air supply, they're not going to last. Then water. Now, water, you might be able to go, by the way, for about 8 days without it, something like that. Of course, if you're sweating a lot, you won't last that long. Food, maybe 3 or 4 weeks. Clothing and shelter. And that guy teaching the class said sex. I'm serious. He was not kidding. So anyway, it's food, water, shelter, clothing, health, and freedom. Or at least visitation for people who don't have the health and freedom that they would have appreciated. And people, now you can look at this and say, well, the Son of Man shall come in his glory. This has to do with Jesus Christ coming back at the second advent, and he's dealing with how people have treated the 144,000 Jewish evangelists. If you're into that prophecy paradigm, people might write it off like that. What you've got to be careful of is taking parables and saying this has to do with the millennium. I believe in the millennium. Well, there's a guy preaching. He was a guest preacher at a church we were members of. And he mentioned one of the things in Matthew 13. Remember those 7 parables? He says, this has to do with getting rewarded in the millennium. And I went up after him afterwards and talked to him and said, well, I've seen that in my life now. He said, we can agree to disagree. He couldn't see that it had anything other to do than the millennium. Sometimes our prophecy, everything gets dispensationalized to a ridiculous extreme. I mean, the principles are still there. Verse 41, then shall he say also unto them on the left hand, those are the goats, depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire, house forever, prepared for the devil and his angels. It wasn't originally prepared for man. For I was an hungered, and ye gave me no meat, meat meaning food. I was thirsty, and ye gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me not in. Think of the homeless. Naked, and you clothed me not. At least think of people who don't have enough to face the elements. Sick and in prison, and ye visited me not. Then shall they also answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee an hungered, or thirst, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, and in prison? It's always those 6 things. And did not minister unto thee. Then shall he answer them, saying, verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye did it not to one of the least of these, ye did it not to me. and these shall go away into everlasting punishment, no annihilation, but the righteous into life eternal. Now, while it's true, this seems like Jesus is coming back at the second advent, you can't just write it off to, well, those are those that are alive at the second advent. It doesn't matter to us. It does. I'd hate to find out that I'm wrong, and that I have ignored people's needs because I thought this was just for another group of people. But notice that he says, unto the least of these my brethren. This is taking care of other Christians. The needs of the world are bottomless. You go to where people are begging, you can empty your wallet. You can give and give till you've got nothing left for yourself. Yes, well, the early church was known to go and seek out people to help. At times there's a writing about that. Really, as Christians, our first priority is other Christians. Like Jesus said, the poor ye have always. Anytime you want, you can do something good to them. But we have to first and foremost watch out for other Christians. Do they have enough to drink, to eat? Do they have enough clothing? Do they have a place to live? I have been homeless or nearly homeless. Christians have taken me in. And this had to do with the mission field, and this also had to do with Christian school teaching just in between jobs. And in that case, they take me and my wife and kids in. It was just like a week at a time or something to, establish a new job. But I can remember living in a parsonage in a mission field in Massachusetts. We called it a team house, and they sold a team house. 3 Christian families took me in before I and my roommate were able to actually get our own apartment. I can remember going to Alaska on a mission team. 3 families took me in till I actually got residency and was able to live in a college dormitory and pay in-state tuition. Yeah, these things really happen to Christians. You can find yourself homeless, or just about homeless. You can find yourself without enough clothing. You can find yourself hungry. You can find yourself thirsty. You can find yourself in prison. You can find yourself in the hospital. I will just say, at least in the hospital, you didn't do anything wrong, hopefully. Actually, prison, though, when they're persecuting you, being in prison is not your fault, if that's why you're there. Or if you're falsely accused, which does happen. Look at Joseph. Now, what's our time? 10:23. Let's go on. Mark 2:19. Any questions, comments? Mark 2:19. And Jesus said unto them, can the children of the bride chamber fast while the bridegroom is with them? Actually, let's go back to verse 18. And the disciples of John and of the Pharisees used to fast. And they came, and remember, John was really an Old Testament prophet anyway, on the pages of the New Testament. And they come and say unto him, that is unto Jesus, why do the disciples of John and the Pharisees fast, but thy disciples fast not? And Jesus said unto them, can the children of the bride chamber fast while the bridegroom is with them? Hey, you get a wedding back in those days. You have 7 days of celebration. You can see it in Genesis when Jacob got married. You can see it with Samson and Judges. As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. But the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken away from them, and then they shall fast in those days. See, Jesus is with us spiritually, but right now he is not with us physically. No man also seweth a piece of new cloth on an old garment, else the piece that filleth it up taketh away from the old, and the rent is made worse. In other words, the new piece is going to shrink. And you end up with a worse rip. And no man putteth new wine into old bottles. Don't think of bottles as the old Coke bottles of glass, or the new ones that we use these days out of plastic. Think of animal skins. They do dry out and lose their flexibility after a while. They're made of leather. Else the new wine doth burst the bottles, and wine is spilled. See, what happens is it ferments, it expands, and it'll burst something that's not flexible. And the bottles will be marred, but new wine must be put into new bottles. You do not take the Old Testament and try to patch it up with something from the New. You do not take the Old Testament and put in the new wine of the New Testament and expect it not to have a problem. The Jews, after the destruction of Jerusalem, wrote down what we call the Talmud. It is, in English, it's about 6,000 pages when you translate it. The big one was the Babylonian Talmud, written in Babylon. Remember, the Jews were taken into Babylonian captivity, and when Cyrus let them go back, most of them didn't go. Most of them remained up there, and there was a Jewish community even after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And they started writing down this oral tradition, and they now call it the Babylonian Talmud. Because they knew, okay, we don't have a temple, we can't sacrifice. How is Judaism going to survive? How are we going to survive? And there's another one written called the Jerusalem Talmud, although it was not written in Jerusalem, also called the Palestinian Talmud, which is not taken as seriously. It's sort of truncated. But it's got some good history. It's got legends. It can really divert you from good Bible interpretation. It's got a lot of legalism. Judaism can get, I think any religion can get extremely legalistic. Our problem sometimes is we make our own Christian Talmud. For instance, you set up rules. I can understand a uniform code in a Christian school, but sometimes it just goes to ridiculous extremes, especially for adults. All this legalism, where your tithes are recorded and you are confronted if you do not pay your tithe. So a person who puts cash in is confronted. We don't have a record of your giving. You have to write a check. And if not, you can get fired from our organization. All these rules and regulations. The patriarchy movement is full of that. All these rules, you taking certain principles, often out of the Old Testament, making hard, fast laws. The Old Testament discourages borrowing. So you say you cannot borrow, not even to go to college. I still owe student loans. It doesn't bother me because it was worth it. Or and it gets to ridiculous extremes. You should not leave home until you are married. Someone tell that to John the Baptist or Jesus Christ. Even your parents should pick your spouse. Or your parents, shouldn't be paying for college. They should build you a house, using an Old Testament verse. We can get so legal, all kinds of legalism. What we're doing is we're putting the new wine of the New Testament into dried out wineskins, leather, that can't hold it once, the fermentation process really gets going or continues. We can't mix the testaments. I understand the teaching of covenantal unity. And if someone says covenantal unity, I'd say fine. What do you bring into service? A sheep or a bullock? Book of Hebrews says we're under a different covenant. We're under a different religion. I grew up Jewish. I am not a practicing Jew. I am ethnically a Jew. Ask any white supremacist. But it is a different religion. The cross has come. We're now under something different. Hebrews says it's a different covenant and it is a better covenant. Watch how you mix the two. Yes, Old Testament principles apply. Often they could be argued. Some of the principles. Some of that was used to help found our country. But watch it that it doesn't become a bunch of Old Testament legalism, or even worse, Talmudic legalism. I mean, the Pharisees were more legalistic than the law of Moses was, because they added to the law. They said, okay, here's the written law, now we're going to have an oral law, a fence around the law, so if you can't get through that, there's no way you're going to break the written law. And it gets even worse. Satmar Hasidim, like in New York, they're more legalistic than the Talmud is, according to someone who left them. Thinks she left the Satmar, but anyway, she left the Hasidic movement. And it can just legalism. Mark 4. (26). Now we do see some parables of the kingdom which we're going to skip because we actually had them in Matthew 13. They are repeated. Some of those in Matthew 13 are repeated in Mark 4 and in Luke 8. But Mark 4:26. And he said, "So is the kingdom of God as if a man should cast seed into the ground, and should sleep and rise night and day, and the seed should spring up and grow, he knoweth not how." We're still trying to figure it out. Well, all the science, well, all the genetic engineering that we are capable of. How does this miracle, even a baby growing in the womb, seed, plant a little seed, and you get a tree 100 years later, a huge tree. He knoweth not how, for the earth bringeth forth fruit of herself. First the blade, then the ear, after that the full corn in the ear. And don't think of our yellow corn cobs that you buy at Walmart. That part of the world didn't even know about those. It means grain. But when the fruit is brought forth, immediately he putteth in the sickle, because the harvest is come. From a commentary online, the growing season in Palestine is short. Little field work such as cultivating had to be done. Most crops were ready in 4 months. He does not leave that field alone because he is not interested in it. He realizes that when he has prepared the seed bed, he has sown the seed, nothing more can be done because the earth brings forth of itself automatically, says the text. He does not know how it does it. This is the law of God laid down in nature. If he should seek to find out if the seed is sprouting, or if he should seek to find out if the plant could grow faster, he would kill the plant. Like they say, you take the cake out of the oven too early, ruins the cake. He must leave it alone in order to obtain the harvest which he desires. The time of harvest is very important. A day too early, there are too many unripe kernels. A day too late, too many kernels have already fallen to the ground. Timing is so important. The great harvester knows the exact time. How easy it is to become impatient. The people then wanted to make him king. They wanted to make Jesus the king, but it was not the right time. We say, "Jesus, I wish you would come back soon." Or some people, take the average 20-year-old Christian boy, "Don't come back, I want to get married first." I'm serious. What guy wants to go to heaven as a virgin? That's the truth. You run into that in Bible school. "I can't wait to get married." Well, why? They might not admit it, but that's the reason. Or even, women and stuff, and especially because women tend to want to have babies and everything. You want to have your lives, you want to live your life before you go to heaven. But then sometimes it's like, things are bad. It's almost like a suicidal depression. Things are bad. I wish Jesus would come back. And then if things are good, I hope he doesn't come back for a while. I'm doing quite well right now. It's all about us. And it's true. We are very self-centered. I'm no exception. Now, any comments? Thing is, the seed is going to grow. The kingdom of God is going to grow. The harvester knows the time. We don't. You try to rush that which takes a certain amount of time, you're going to destroy what you planted. Too early, too late. Just think of go to Walmart. See, some fruits aren't ripe yet, and hopefully they'll ripen, especially like bananas. Some stuff's already overripe and it's yucky and you don't want to buy it. That type of thing, but now it's the harvesting, not just picking out of the supermarket. Any questions? And by the way, in life, there's all kinds, a billion applications to this. Think of your kids. You don't want them growing up too quickly. You don't want them not growing up either. Okay? These principles apply all over the place. You might be a boss in a job and you have to supervise and develop people in their jobs. Sometimes they're going to have to go and learn the next step in leadership or whatever they're doing. But sometimes you don't want things to happen too quickly. Okay, Father, do give us a good, safe week. Again, as we enjoy what should be some pretty good weather, despite thunderstorms that's supposed to come in. And give us a good week in your word. In Jesus' name, amen.